In this video, I just want to talk about the process of performing a cluster analysis from beginning to end. In this video, I just want to talk about the process of completing a cluster analysis from beginning to end. There's 4 main steps in this process. The first step is finding a creator and selecting an artifact or artifacts that you'd like to analyze. I would really recommend that you pick someone that you find interesting or that you want to know more about, maybe somebody that you value or you find that you're a fan of. I'm going to use Taylor Swift. I'm not really a fan of Taylor Swift, but her songs are really interesting to analyze. And there's a lot that we can really talk about because she's in the public eye. Now, you can use a celebrity, you can use a singer or songwriter, you can use a band, you can use an artist, a novelist. However, it's really important that you pick an artifact that's relatively small because you're only writing a 5 to 7 page paper, and anything over 20 pages to analyze is going to be way too much. So maybe you like a novelist, but you can analyze a smaller, shorter essay that they wrote. I wouldn't recommend doing speeches longer than 10 minutes, and I wouldn't recommend doing a few songs if you decide to do someone that's a singer-songwriter. So once you figure out which creator and artifacts you want to analyze, you have to analyze the artifacts, which I'm going to show you how to do in the next video. But analyzing the artifacts is a big bulk of the work in this unit. In fact, the paper kind of is the last thing that we're going to do. Everything else leading up to the paper is going to be a lot of grunt work and hands-on work that you're going to have to do on your own. And I'll be checking as we complete sections of the unit. Once you analyze the artifact or artifacts, you can begin formulating a research question. And the research question will become essentially the hypothesis of your essay. And you're going to try to answer that research question by the end of your essay. In my Taylor Swift example, I'm going to talk about how we can determine a hypothesis for her concept of love and how we can test that hypothesis. And then finally, once you're done all this grunt work, you have to write the essay. The essay is sort of formulaic. There are different sections to this essay, so it's not really difficult to write. The actual work that you're going to have to put in is going to be the analysis part. The writing of the essay should be one of the easier things that you do in this unit. Now, when you go to analyze an artifact, the first thing that we need to do is identify key terms. And I'll be exploring key terms like love and Romeo and Juliet and blank space and first person speakers in the Taylor Swift video. When you select key terms in your artifact, it's important to remember that you don't want more than 5 or 6 significant key terms for your essay. Any more than 5 or 6 and you're going to stretch yourself thin. 3 to 5 solid key terms is really what you want to shoot for. You may be able to find this with one short song. You may need to find multiple songs or multiple artifacts, each with a key term. However, the key terms should be related to one another. To determine a key term, you look for the frequency or intensity with which those words are used. So in Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, for instance, he uses the dream a lot. So that's a very significant term in that speech, and it would be a key term because it describes something about his worldview. Now, there's different types of key terms. You can look for things like God and devil terms. Basically, God terms represent the ultimate ideal. Devil terms represent the ultimate negative or evil, right? And you may find that in some artifacts, the person is using these terms sort of simultaneously. So for something like tax relief, right? Taxes seems like it's being framed as a negative term, almost like a devil term. And relief is being framed as this positive, more ultimate ideal, right? Relief is good, taxes are bad, right? So if we were to look at someone's speech where they're using the phrase tax relief, we might break those two up as God and devil terms. Now, for this unit, you may also choose a non-discursive text, such as a painting or a music video or a movie. Some students even do stand-up comedy, which is fine. Just know that you may not be able to analyze specific language or word choices, but you can still find key terms as colors, shapes, images, lines, anything that may represent something about the artist as they're creating this piece. Once we locate those key terms, we're going to do what's called charting the clusters. And essentially, this is where a lot of students get tripped up because they kind of overthink this part. Essentially, charting the clusters is really just underlining any word that appears in proximity to the key term. Even if it's not in the same sentence or the same line, sometimes it may not even be in the same paragraph or stanza. If a word appears within a close proximity to a key term, we still want to mark it down as a cluster term. The reason being is because when we chart these cluster terms, it suggests that these terms may relate to the key term itself. And I'm going to show you how this happens when we talk about Taylor Swift. Once you get your key terms and your cluster terms together, you're going to look at what the cluster terms suggest about the key terms, and then you're going to look at what the key terms suggest about the creator's worldview. The goal here really is to find patterns or links in the language that they're using. So for instance, in the two Taylor Swift songs that we're going to look at, she uses the word love in two completely different ways. So there's a connection with the concept of love, but what's different about them is how she views that concept depending on the age that she was when she wrote the song. Also depending on who wrote the song with her. These patterns suggest a particular key term may be modified or influenced by associated terms or modified or influenced by the creator using those terms. Another thing that we can do with this analysis is what's called an agon analysis, where we examine opposing terms that involves looking for terms that oppose or contradict other terms in the rhetoric. Taylor Swift kind of has this a little bit, where she uses, Romeo and Juliet with the concept of love, and that story really isn't about a forever love that she's discussing in her own song. We may also find that certain words cause conflict or tension. With the tax relief or coin shortage phrases, there's a conflict or tension there, right? That taxes are bad, relief is good. And it's framing this concept in such a way to make you feel as if taxes are bad and relief is necessary. When we go to formulate a research question then, we want to look at things like what strategies are being used to accomplish the objectives of the writer. So if it's a political speech, maybe some of the language like tax relief is being used in a way to gain votes or get people to understand taxes as a negative. We may look at a question like what meaning is being communicated by the use of these key terms and clusters. In my Taylor Swift example, that's kind of the research question that we're going to look at, is what meaning is being communicated about the concept of love. Also, we might look at what implications of particular clusters and key terms there are. Also, what controversies there are in the public view of these terms. Your questions can vary beyond the questions that I have on the PowerPoint, but that's up to you, and that's really going to be shaped by your creator and artifact that you're looking at. So then, when we go to write the essay, in this video, I want to briefly talk about the major components of writing the cluster analysis essay. There's a few main sections, and you should be using subheadings to denote these sections in your essay. The first section is your introduction. This is where you're going to discuss your topic, your creator and artifact, discuss your research question, discuss maybe the contribution to rhetoric or rhetorical theory, and the overall significance of the language that your writer is using in their artifacts. You also want to describe the artifact and its context. This can be a separate section or placed within the introduction. But essentially, you are explaining what artifacts you analyzed, who the creator is, and why these artifacts are important, and why you chose them. In the next section, which will be called your methodology section, it's essentially you explaining what cluster analysis is. The goal of this section is for anyone that's never done a cluster analysis to be able to see what your methodology was for determining the interpretation that you nailed down with this analysis. It's also for me to get a sense of how well you understand the process of performing a cluster analysis. So the way that you're explaining it will let me know a little bit about how well you were able to perform this, maybe where some confusion rested in your performance of this cluster analysis, etc. Afterwards, you're going to have a section on key terms where you explain the cluster terms and the key terms and what those key terms mean. Then you'll have an analysis section where you basically explain and interpret all the artifacts together, what the key terms suggest about the Redder and their worldview, and also include any outside research that you did to support that analysis. And then in a conclusion section, you'll really discuss the contribution that your analysis makes to this Redder, the worldview, the concepts they discuss, to rhetoric or rhetorical theory, or anything that you can really think of that is dependent on your individual project.